Okay, in this video, I'd like to show everyone more about Coral Castle and how Ed Leedskalnin had this whole monopolar system set up. So let's get into it. Okay, in my last video, I left off talking about how the flywheel in everything in the whole system is basically reaching resonance with each other. The way to do this is to get everything either vibrating at the same frequency, the same modulation, or to take everything to zero, where there's no movement, no oscillation, no modulation. Okay, so this is what we're going to be going into now. So when Ed had his magneto-dielectric generator going, this thing's producing the power and it's putting all the dielectric into the ignition system or the black box of the Model T. So at this point it's DC. So he's got this whole thing strung together, and this is what I have to point on to at this point. Okay, with this whole Model T Ford V magnet setup with the right angle and how it is self-sustaining, meaning it keeps regenerating and keeping the energy in the system. There's an interesting fact that I come across that I really haven't proven to be true. I just come across this and I tried to verify it, but I couldn't prove it to be true. But there's this story, I guess, that but it makes perfect sense. Okay, there's a story that John Keeley is the man that invented this whole system with the V magnets and sold it to Henry Ford. In the other story it says Henry Ford came up with it. But listen, John Keeley is the one that I was talking about in my video before earlier that took 1,000 tuning forks in a room, went outside the room with one tuning fork, struck the one tuning fork and set off all 1,000 in the room in the sympathetic vibration. Okay, this is what you're trying to do at a subatomic level. Okay, so it's said that he come up with this whole system for the Model T. And Keeley invented a musical motor, one that ran on musical vibrations of tuning forks, and said that the music could resonate with the atoms of the ether. Keeley said that the specific gravity of the ether is about 4 times lighter than hydrogen gas, the lightest so far discovered. So that's this whole deal with Keeley. So what it's saying is that once this thing is running in the Model T, that the story goes that once you get it running, it will run off its own power and produce like 40 horsepower. So it's not the full power of the gas engine, but there is a hack to make this happen. So I think this is what Tesla did with his 1930 Pierce Arrow, with the big antenna on it. He's just putting his monopolar system into the car and making it regenerate and self-sustain. If Elon Musk had half a brain, he'd be doing the same thing with his system. But he's pretty much throwing Tesla under the bus too. So what Ed's doing, coming off of the points in condenser box, what he's doing is, you can see he's got this bottle here. And this bottle's got wraps of wire on it, around it. It's got a wire wrapped around it So this thing could either be a coil or a capacitor. Okay, so what it is he's probably using this as a capacitor in this configuration. And it's just a Leyden jar. This is what you used back in the old days for a battery. A Leyden jar is just a glass jar that holds an electric charge. So he's got these things just like this, wrapped around a bottle with water filled in it, and it holds an electric charge. So Ed's probably got a whole bunch of these tied together like a daisy chain. Okay? So at the end of Ed's daisy chain, he would have something to resist the load. Okay, so let's look at this book. It says resistive loads. In DC circuits, there's only one basic type of load, which is resisted. Okay, even motor loads appear to be resistive because there is a conversion of electrical energy into mechanical energy. Okay, so this resistive load are loads that contain pure resistance, such as an electric heating equipment and incandescent lighting. The resistive loads are characterized by the facts that number one, they produce heat, and number two, the current and the voltage are in phase with each other. So what Ed's got in his system now, going from his bank of capacitors that are storing the electric charge, he's got this device. This is referred to as the electric magnet in the system. Okay, what it is, it's called the PMH. Ed calls it the perpetual motion holder, meaning that this energy is stored in the coils once it's charged up, and it continuously runs the loop. Once the bar's on here, it's always running the loop. Okay, just like the racetrack at CERN. Same deal. Okay, so this is Ed's resistive load at the end of the daisy chain. Now, keep in mind, he could have configured this whole system a bunch of different ways. He could have had all kinds of coils around this whole thing, pulling AC and switching the currents back and forth, doing all kinds of stuff. So I'm just showing you like the most basic setup on how he probably had this thing going. Okay, so we're going to continue with more on what the system is actually doing. Okay, he's setting up this whole thing. Okay, this is coming from Dollard. Okay, power of the ether. The ether adds to the mass of an object when rotated faster and faster in space. So when you're rotating this whole thing, it's all extended through space. This is what you need to consider. It's working just like this. It's working the same thing as the radio tower. It's all propagating out from that point. Just like the pyramid. It's an antenna. Just like the water. The water is the antenna of life because it's a dipole. Just like consciousness. So this is all dealing with the same thing. Okay, so Dollard is saying that the matter of the physical object is extended through space and becomes one with the ether. You need to create a magnetic field of equal potential so that the magnetic lines of force do not pull into it. Okay? Here, all the lines are pulling into it. This is what you're seeing. When you take away those lines, you get vector equilibrium, just like the maglev pencil is doing here. Okay? When it's at rest, when there's no frequency or vibration in it, then you're at zero. You're always trying to get to zero, or you're trying to get everything to vibrate at the same thing. And this is exactly what Nikola Tesla's uh, earthquake machine was doing. It's just a mechanical oscillator. It's just always going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, no matter what your material is, if you keep hammering back and forth at the right frequency, and once it achieves its resonant frequency with the object, Tesla said that he could put one of his oscillators on the Brooklyn Bridge and drop it in probably like less than an hour. He ran into this problem in downtown Manhattan. He put one of his oscillators on a steel beam in the lower part of a building, and the oscillator switch got stuck and he couldn't shut it off. And he kept hammering and hammering, and it almost dropped the building. The fire department had to come in and knock it off there and shut it down. So this just goes to prove that these oscillations are super powerful. Okay, so like I said, this wheel is it's getting supercharged. When those magnets are spinning into that phi configuration, it's doing incredible things. Okay, so the electric field is a combination of electric and dielectric. Okay, the counter space slope ratio of harmonics is 2 to 3. The transverse slope is 1 to 4 harmonic ratio. Spatial harmonics occur in aromatic multiples, where counter space harmonics occur in geometric divisions. Harmonics become lower in frequency. In counter space, harmonics become higher in frequency. So you have one dimension in space with 3 coordinates. They say this dark energy could also be called sound. Okay, so here's what we're moving with. Is the whole deal with transmitting this deal. So high voltage, low current is how Tesla's working. Okay, this comes from Dollard Origin of Energy Synthesis. The electric companies are using a free energy in their system. They're using free energy in their system. It's like a cosmic oscillation that does not register on their equipment. This is called a synchronous condenser. It uses energy out of the ether. This is used in power transmission. A synchronous condenser built by Steinmetz is a dynamo motor, a synchronous motor that is submerged in hydrogen gas. The hydrogen is to cut windage and heat. The motor only connects to itself electrically. So this is what we're getting down to again. One wire. Okay. Through synchronous parameter variation, this motor becomes a generator by working its own phases inside and supplying all the magnetism for the system to keep the transformer lines magnetized. In between the synchronous condenser and the synchronous condenser is in between that the power line and the substation. Okay, so the space between the wires is magnetized. Okay, this is the diagram from Steinmetz of an electrical field of a conductor. Okay, the radial lines are the dielectric lines of force, and the circumferential lines are the magnetic lines of force. So what it's showing you here is actually, it should be the longitudinal lines, or not radial lines, excuse me. So are the dielectric lines of force. Okay, so the circular lines would be the magnetic, and then the longitudinal would be the dielectric. So what you're trying to do is this. You're trying to get this action to happen right here. These are 2 power lines, and you're trying to basically make this happen, because that's what the condition that's happening in the universe with the oscillations. Those 2 are always pushing and pulling. So this thing is doing synchronous parameter variation. It's pulling in from the ether. So it's getting an extra charge on this whole thing. And like you said, it always interacts at 90-degree right angles. So where the dielectric lines meet the magnetic lines is where the electromagnetic energy flowing into or out of the paper parallel to the axis of the wire. At that crossing point, we call that unit the Planck, or in quantum the photon. Okay, so we ain't even dealing with none of that terminology. And this is the electric field of a circuit. Okay, so that's what you want to do. You want to create this circuit. The system traps the electric field by bounding the ether between the wires. The radial lines of force are attempting to pull the wires together, and the magnetic lines are attempting to fill the space between them. Okay, so I guess they're radial longitudinal is how it's saying it. So, this is what you're doing. This is your same deal as this. It's showing you the same thing. Now, if you place this over top of this at your apex, it's doing the same thing, which can be proven by my pyramids and what it does to the clouds. It does the same thing. It's generating heat. Okay? Just like Tesla's monopolar system in Colorado Springs. When he's blasting this off top of that tower, it's doing that. There's your dielectric discharge. That's all he's doing. He's creating man-made lightning. This is what Ed's doing. So I'm going to leave this video off here. And we're getting closer. I'm going to show you how this thing is going to work. And trust me, it's going to be a real blast. Thanks for watching.